She had always been underestimated, dismissed as someone who couldn't handle anything more complicated than a paper target at a county fair. The small town had its favorites, big shots who carried the newest rifles, flashy scopes, and endless stories of past glory, but Mara, she preferred quiet and simplicity. Her rifle, a humble, worn-down piece she'd bought secondhand for barely $100, didn't look like much. Its wood was scratched, its metal dulled by years of use, and the scope had a small crack that distorted light just slightly. When she brought it to the range that morning, the usual crowd snickered, their laughter sharp and dismissive. That's a toy, not a rifle," one of the seasoned hunters called, swinging his own sleek, polished firearm through the air as if to punctuate the insult. Mara's only response was a faint smile, the kind that suggested she had no intention of letting anyone's opinion disturb her focus. She had learned long ago that boasting or defending her choices only gave people more ammunition for their ridicule. The truth, she knew, was far more potent than any words could convey. She had been practicing quietly and tirelessly for months, mastering her aim, understanding the wind, the weight of the bullet, and the rhythm of her own breathing. Every shot she took at her modest target in the woods behind her small cabin had been an exercise in patience, a test of resolve, and a rehearsal of precision. The cheap rifle she carried was not a limitation, it was a challenge she had chosen, a proving ground she had built for herself. And today she intended to prove that skill and intuition could outweigh money and showmanship. The crowd at the range continued to chatter and laugh, each remark another brick in the invisible wall they built to keep her underestimated. But Mara didn't see walls. She saw angles, distances, and the invisible currents of air that would guide her bullet with unwavering fidelity to the target she had chosen. She adjusted her grip, feeling the cold metal against her fingers, and squinted down the cracked lens of the scope. The target sat far across the open field, almost absurdly distant, and the wind carried with it a playful, teasing swirl that made the shot seem impossible even to the most optimistic of marksmen. The seasoned hunters whispered among themselves, shaking their heads and exchanging bets about how long it would take her to miss entirely. Mara inhaled slowly, letting the air fill her lungs, then released it with deliberate control. Her finger found the trigger, steadying not just the rifle but herself, her years of solitary practice focusing into a single, precise moment. She remembered her father's voice, long gone, encouraging her to find rhythm and trust in the simplest tools. That voice, faint yet unyielding in her memory, reminded her that greatness was not always found in the most expensive, the loudest, or the most polished. It could be found in patience, in quiet confidence, and in an intimate knowledge of one's own capabilities. The crowd's laughter reached a crescendo, but Mara shut it out, listening instead to the faint hum of the wind, the subtle tremor in her hands, and the pulse of her own heartbeat. Time seemed to stretch, a delicate suspension where everything narrowed to the line of sight, the distance, and the silent promise of what could happen if she executed her shot with perfection. Then with a final exhale she squeezed the trigger. The sound cracked sharply, echoing across the field like a signal that something extraordinary had just been attempted. The bullet flew, spinning with a subtle elegance born of careful calculation and instinct, cutting through the air that the mockers believed would betray her aim. Eyes widened as the projectile arced perfectly, a shimmering line that defied their expectations, a dance of precision that could only have been achieved by someone who understood her craft intimately. The target, far across the open stretch, seemed impossibly small from her vantage point, and yet the bullet struck dead center, producing a sharp, satisfying mark that seemed to freeze the moment in disbelief. Silence fell instantly, a weighty, suspended pause as the hunters stared in shock, their mouths opening and closing, unable to find words to capture the reality of what they had just witnessed. Mara lowered her rifle, the same calm smile playing at her lips, and looked around at the crowd that had mocked her mere moments ago. The mixture of astonishment, respect, and lingering incredulity painted their faces, and for a few heartbeats she savored the pure, unspoken acknowledgement that skill, focus, and perseverance could triumph over appearances and expectation. It was more than a shot, it was a statement, a quiet rebellion against assumptions, and a demonstration of the unheralded power of patience and mastery. In that single instant, Mara had transformed from the underestimated figure with a cheap rifle, into someone whose ability could no longer be dismissed or mocked. The murmurs of disbelief rolled across the field like a wave, rippling through the crowd with a mixture of admiration and begrudging respect. Mara felt their eyes on her, the weight of expectation suddenly inverted into a curious fascination, yet she remained calm, almost meditative, as if the moment had been nothing extraordinary at all. To her, it was merely the logical result of years of deliberate practice, quiet observation, and an understanding of forces that most people ignored entirely. She walked slowly toward the target, her boots crunching softly on the dry grass, and the laughter had vanished, replaced by a tense, almost reverent silence. As she reached the metal stand, she examined the mark again, her eyes tracing the clean impact with meticulous attention. Not a single chip of lead was off-center. The bullet had pierced the target with unerring precision, and the faint dent in the wood echoed her mastery back to her. The other shooters exchanged glances, some shaking their heads as though the laws of physics themselves had been violated, others silently questioning the arrogance that had led them to dismiss her in the first place. Mara, though aware of their astonishment, didn't gloat. There was no need. Victory to her had always been private, intimate, a reward that required no applause to validate itself. She adjusted her rifle, checked the alignment of the scope again, and thought through the next shot, knowing the crowd would be watching with a mixture of disbelief and expectation. Some of the hunters whispered among themselves, concocting excuses. Perhaps the wind had aided her unexpectedly, perhaps the rifle had been secretly superior to its appearance. Mara chuckled softly under her breath, almost inaudible, the kind of sound that suggested amusement at the limitations of human judgment. They failed to realize that her rifle's simplicity was an advantage. It forced her to understand every variable, every nuance of trajectory, and every subtle fluctuation in her surroundings. She stepped back, measuring the next distance, her mind already calculating the arc, the drop, the minute adjustments needed to counter gravity, wind, and the slightest tremor in her own hands. The field seemed suddenly transformed, a canvas on which she painted with bullets rather than brushstrokes, each mark a testament to patience and observation. Mara could feel the intensity of their gaze, the mixture of skepticism and wonder pressing against her consciousness, yet it only sharpened her focus. The next target, set farther than the last, seemed daunting to anyone else, but she welcomed the challenge. Her fingers brushed the worn stock of her rifle, and she allowed herself a brief internal smile. This was what she had trained for, not just the act of shooting but the act of being doubted, of standing alone while others scoffed, and still proving that determination could outweigh privilege. The wind shifted slightly, teasing the trajectory, and she adjusted instinctively, her mind translating gusts and air pressure into minute changes in aim. She crouched, exhaled slowly, and let her body align with her intention. When she squeezed the trigger again, the shot resonated differently this time, a softer, precise crack that carried across the distance in a way that was almost musical. The bullet flew, guided by years of invisible practice, and again struck true. Another silence enveloped the crowd, heavier this time as they realized the first shot had not been a fluke. Whispers erupted, some in awe, others in thinly veiled envy, but Mara barely noticed. She was immersed in the rhythm of her own skill, the dance between her, the rifle, and the elements. Her heart remained steady, each beat matching the quiet hum of accomplishment that resonated in her mind. The seasoned hunters began to approach, some hesitantly, others with cautious curiosity, yet Mara did not flinch or defer. She had earned her space, her credibility, through action rather than argument. The next challenge awaited and she was ready. She raised her rifle once more, feeling the familiar balance of weight and form, and considered the ultimate test she had envisioned in her mind for weeks. A target, obscured partially by a grove of trees at a distance that seemed laughable even to her own expectations, awaited her. She walked the field carefully, noting every obstacle, every shadow, every irregularity in the terrain that might influence the bullet's flight. Mara had trained not just to shoot but to think, to anticipate, to merge intuition with calculation. This, she realized, was the moment where all her preparation converged. She positioned herself with care, measured the distance with practiced eyes, and let the silence stretch as her concentration deepened. Time seemed to expand, each second elongating as she visualized the path of the bullet, predicting how it would navigate the world between her and the target. When she finally squeezed the trigger, the sound seemed to echo infinitely, and the bullet, propelled by precision, skill, and an almost imperceptible confidence, disappeared into the air. The reaction was instantaneous. The crowd gasped, some clutching their hats, others frozen mid-step as the projectile found the target hidden among the trees, hitting a nearly invisible bullseye with an impossible accuracy that defied logic and expectation alike. Mara lowered her rifle slowly, allowing the silence to speak for itself, letting the impact of her shot sink into the minds of those who had doubted her mere moments ago. This was not just a demonstration of skill, it was a revelation of perseverance, focus, and the understated power of someone who had devoted herself to mastery rather than appearance or wealth. The stunned silence hung in the air like a tangible weight, pressing against the onlookers with an almost oppressive force. Mara felt no rush to speak, no need to explain, and no desire to let their astonishment diminish her quiet satisfaction. She simply stood, rifle lowered, her breathing steady and measured, letting the moment stretch to its fullest. Each person in the crowd seemed frozen, caught between disbelief and awe, struggling to reconcile their preconceived notions with the reality before them. The cheap rifle, the one they had laughed at, had become a symbol of her mastery, of a skill honed not through privilege or extravagance, but through relentless focus, patience, and understanding. As she scanned the field, she noticed the subtle shift in their attitudes, the quiet recognition that talent could not be bought or borrowed, it had to be earned. Mara's eyes softened as she thought about all the hours she had spent alone, standing in the cold dawn or the scorching heat, aligning her aim, learning to read the wind, and trusting her instincts over the opinions of others. Each day of practice, each missed shot, each moment of doubt had led to this culmination, a revelation that true precision did not require wealth, spectacle, or validation. And yet, she realized, part of the beauty of this moment lay in the reactions around her. The hunters who had mocked her were now hesitant, their confidence shaken, replaced by a grudging respect that they could not disguise. Mara's lips curved into a faint, serene smile, not of triumph over them, but of acknowledgement of her own journey. She had proven more than just her marksmanship. She had proven that patience, dedication, and self-belief were forces more powerful than ridicule, more lasting than fleeting laughter. As she stepped closer to the final target, obscured behind an intricate cluster of trees and uneven terrain, the murmurs grew into soft whispers, the air thick with anticipation and the unspoken challenge of what came next. This was the true test, the one she had envisioned for weeks, not just hitting a distant mark, but achieving a shot that seemed utterly impossible, a shot that would leave no room for doubt or explanation. She crouched carefully, the worn metal and wood of her rifle familiar against her hands, and allowed herself a moment of stillness. Her mind became a silent symphony of calculation, intuition, and memory, the culmination of countless hours spent practicing in solitude. The wind whispered, carrying subtle changes across the field, and she adjusted her aim imperceptibly, a slight tilt here, a minor compensation there, aligning her body and breath in perfect harmony with the environment. The distance was daunting, the angle difficult, yet Mara felt no fear, only a profound sense of focus and clarity. When she exhaled slowly and squeezed the trigger, the sound cut sharply through the morning air, precise and clean, yet somehow quieter than expected, as if the rifle itself respected the significance of the moment. The bullet soared, spinning with controlled elegance, guided by the combination of skill, instinct, and the quiet understanding of physics she had internalized over the months. The crowd held its breath collectively, every pair of eyes following the impossible arc, hearts racing in anticipation and disbelief. And then, as if time itself had bowed to her precision, the projectile found the hidden bullseye with flawless accuracy. The impact was sharp, almost ceremonious, leaving no question of intent, no hint of luck. Every spectator froze, some with hands over their mouths, some staring as though they could not comprehend what they had just witnessed. Mara lowered her rifle slowly, her expression calm, serene, as if she had merely carried out a simple task rather than achieved something extraordinary. The gravity of her accomplishment began to settle over the field. For the first time the hunters, who had once mocked her, approached, their steps cautious and tentative, their eyes betraying a mixture of admiration, awe, and lingering disbelief. They asked questions, some attempting casual conversation, others directly seeking to understand how someone with such a humble tool could perform feats they had considered impossible. Mara answered briefly, her words deliberate and measured, emphasizing patience, practice, and the value of focus rather than the equipment itself. She could sense the internal shift in them, the recalibration of assumptions and expectations, as the reality of her ability reshaped their understanding. Beyond the immediate audience, Mara felt a deeper satisfaction, one that resonated within herself rather than seeking approval from others. She had conquered doubt, not theirs but her own, and had transformed years of solitary effort into undeniable proof of what could be achieved through dedication, skill, and quiet confidence. The morning continued, the sun climbing higher, casting long shadows across the field, yet Mara remained in the center of a small circle of admiration and astonishment. Every successful shot, every careful adjustment, seemed to reinforce the lesson she had lived for so long, that true mastery is not always loud or flashy, but precise, patient, and unwavering. By the time the crowd began to disperse, their laughter replaced by conversations tinged with respect and newfound humility, Mara felt a deep, serene satisfaction. She had taken a cheap rifle, one that no one else valued, and transformed it into an instrument of impossible precision. She had made her mark, not only on the targets but on the minds of those who had doubted her. And as she walked away from the field, her rifle resting lightly in her hands, she carried with her a quiet knowledge that skill, focus, and belief in oneself were more powerful than the opinions of the world, and that the impossible could always be made real by those willing to dedicate themselves fully to the pursuit of mastery. The afternoon sun had climbed high, casting long, warm shadows across the field, and Mara remained focused, undisturbed by the murmuring of the onlookers who had begun to cluster around, still processing the impossible shots she had executed. Their whispers and awe-filled glances provided no distraction. She had trained herself to remain anchored, her attention fixed solely on the rifle, the targets, and the precise alignment of her body. Each shot, she reminded herself silently, was not just a test of aim, but a demonstration of discipline and intuition. Mara's gaze traveled to the next challenge she had envisioned, a target partially concealed behind a thick cluster of bushes, its position irregular, almost mocking in its hidden placement. The path to it was cluttered with uneven terrain, fallen branches, and subtle slopes that threatened to mislead a casual observer. Yet she welcomed the complexity. This was the moment where experience, knowledge, and careful observation would collide into perfect execution. She crouched, feeling the familiar weight of the rifle settle comfortably in her hands, and measured the distance carefully with practiced eyes. The angle was deceiving, slightly downward, the trajectory complicated by the slight breeze shifting across the field, and Mara knew that only a calculated compensation could guarantee success. Her finger rested lightly on the trigger as she exhaled slowly, letting her mind filter out all extraneous noise, the murmurs, the raised eyebrows, the doubtful stares. Everything beyond the target, she realized, was irrelevant. In that instant, she was a single entity with her rifle, a combination of motion, focus, and intention. When she pressed the trigger, the shot resonated with clean precision, the bullet slicing through the air in a perfect arc, navigating the hidden obstacles with uncanny accuracy. The crowd gasped audibly, some taking involuntary steps backward, others frozen in disbelief, their earlier skepticism now replaced by cautious reverence. Mara's lips curved into a faint, private smile, the kind reserved for those who understand that mastery is not about seeking approval but fulfilling one's own potential. She moved steadily toward the target, boots brushing softly against the grass and undergrowth, and examined the impact. Dead center, the mark was flawless, a testament to her meticulous attention to every variable: wind, elevation, trajectory, and the imperceptible tremor of her own hands. Even the most seasoned hunters among the onlookers nodded subtly, their respect now unavoidable and genuine. Some approached her cautiously as if they were entering hallowed ground, their questions probing yet tinged with newfound humility. Mara answered simply, emphasizing patience, careful observation, and consistent practice. Her words, though few, carried weight because they were reinforced by undeniable evidence, a truth that needed no embellishment. As she prepared for the next challenge, her mind wandered briefly to the countless hours spent alone in preparation, each misstep and failure a lesson etched into her memory. She recalled days when fatigue threatened to overpower her, nights when frustration simmered like a silent storm, yet she persevered, trusting that the cumulative effort would eventually manifest in results. And now, standing in the center of the field, rifle in hand, she realized that all that solitary dedication had coalesced into an unshakable confidence, a calm certainty that even the most impossible shot could be achieved. The final target she had chosen for the day was her most ambitious yet, a moving object placed at a considerable distance, partially obscured by a rising slope and swaying slightly with the wind. Most observers would have considered it unattainable, a gamble where luck might play a small role. But Mara did not rely on luck. She relied on calculation, on intuition honed through hours of practice, and on her intimate understanding of every nuance her rifle offered. She adjusted her stance, aligning her body with the subtle incline, and calibrated her aim with precise compensation for the swaying target. Her heart rate remained steady, her mind a quiet, focused observer of the unfolding moment, and as she squeezed the trigger, the bullet flew with remarkable grace, navigating both distance and motion in a near-perfect execution. The impact was immediate, and the target marked squarely in the center, confirming the impossible had been achieved. The crowd erupted, not in laughter or derision, but in awe-filled applause and murmurs of admiration. Mara lowered her rifle slowly, the familiar calm smile returning to her lips, sensing the profound shift in the perception of those around her. No longer was she merely the quiet girl with a cheap rifle. She was a master of her craft, a demonstration that skill, patience and persistence could triumph over doubt and superficial judgment. As she surveyed the field, her eyes caught the subtle expressions of the onlookers. Disbelief still lingered, but respect had firmly taken root, quietly asserting itself in every cautious nod and wide-eyed glance. The realization that she had redefined what was possible within a simple frame of wood and metal filled her with a quiet, enduring satisfaction. Mara had not only demonstrated extraordinary skill, she had rewritten expectations, turning ridicule into admiration and impossibility into tangible proof. And in that serene, triumphant moment she understood something deeper. Mastery was not measured by recognition alone, nor by the price of equipment, but by the dedication, clarity and unwavering focus one brought to every single action. With the day stretching on and the sun casting golden light across the field, Mara finally lowered her rifle completely, the echo of her extraordinary performance lingering in the minds of everyone present. She had transformed the ordinary into something remarkable, the cheap rifle into a vessel of impossible precision, and herself into a quiet legend whose actions spoke louder than any words ever could. As the sun began its slow descent toward the horizon, casting elongated shadows across the field, Mara remained at the center of attention, yet entirely focused on her own rhythm, her own methodical preparation for the next sequence of shots. The earlier astonishment of the crowd had evolved into a quiet, almost reverent energy, each spectator now observing her with a mixture of fascination and tentative expectation. Mara was not swayed by the attention. She had learned long ago that external validation was fleeting, irrelevant to the deep satisfaction derived from true mastery. The field itself seemed transformed in her perception. The grass, the uneven terrain, the subtle inclines, and even the shifting wind all became part of a larger, intricate equation that she could navigate intuitively. Her eyes scanned the area ahead, identifying her next challenge. A series of small targets arranged sporadically at varying distances, some partially obscured by the irregular landscape, others set against the backdrop of distant trees that swayed gently in the evening breeze. Most shooters would have found the arrangement daunting, their focus divided and nerves stretched thin, yet Mara approached it with calm determination. Every step she took was deliberate, each adjustment to her stance and aim calculated with precision, an unconscious choreography developed through countless hours of disciplined practice. She crouched behind a slight rise in the terrain, assessing angles, calculating distances, and adjusting for minute fluctuations in wind direction and speed. Each target represented a unique challenge, a complex puzzle that required integration of perception, calculation, and instinct. Mara's fingers rested lightly on the rifle, the weight familiar and comforting, as if it were an extension of her own body rather than a separate tool. The first target, partially concealed behind a cluster of tall grass, presented a deceptively simple opportunity. She aligned her sight, compensating for elevation and wind, and exhaled slowly, allowing her body to settle into a stable, controlled posture. When she squeezed the trigger, the bullet cut cleanly through the air and struck its mark precisely, leaving no ambiguity, no margin for error. The soft sound of impact resonated across the field, subtle yet undeniable, and the crowd collectively inhaled, a mixture of surprise and admiration flickering across their faces. Mara did not pause, her mind already moving to the next target, a smaller, partially obscured object at a slightly greater distance. She adjusted her stance, her fingers making imperceptible corrections to the scope, and focused intently on the faint shift in the wind that threatened to alter the trajectory. Time seemed to stretch, each second elongated as her concentration intensified, until she exhaled and released the second shot. The bullet struck true, the impact nearly inaudible to all but the most attentive ears, yet the effect was profound. The audience began to murmur appreciatively, their earlier skepticism entirely replaced by the recognition of her extraordinary skill. Mara continued in this rhythm, moving seamlessly from one target to the next, each shot calculated and executed with unerring precision. The complexity of the arrangement intensified with each successive target. Some required her to compensate for uneven ground, others demanded acute attention to subtle variations in distance and wind. Yet she navigated the sequence with remarkable composure, each success reinforcing her focus and deepening her quiet satisfaction. Observers who had approached with tentative curiosity were now openly watching, some taking mental notes, others shaking their heads in awe, unable to reconcile their prior assumptions with the reality of her abilities. Mara's presence was magnetic yet understated. She drew attention without seeking it, allowing the evidence of her skill to speak volumes. As she reached the final and most difficult target, A tiny marker nearly hidden in shadow, positioned at an extreme angle, she allowed herself a brief pause, assessing every variable with meticulous care. Her fingers adjusted the rifle subtly, her breathing slowed further, and her mind became a singular focus, attuned to every nuance of trajectory, elevation, and environmental influence. Then, with a controlled, deliberate squeeze of the trigger, the bullet soared across the field, navigating obstacles and distance with uncanny accuracy, and struck the concealed target dead center. A ripple of astonishment and admiration swept through the crowd, the magnitude of the feat sinking in. Mara lowered her rifle slowly, a calm smile playing across her lips, fully aware that this final demonstration had cemented her reputation not just as a skilled shooter, but as someone capable of achieving what others had deemed impossible. The audience erupted into muted applause, a mixture of awe, disbelief, and respect, yet Mara did not seek to prolong their astonishment. She had proved to herself first and foremost the validity of her skill, the power of focus, patience, and relentless practice. The sun dipped lower, casting golden hues across the field, illuminating the distant trees and uneven terrain she had navigated with flawless precision. Mara felt a quiet satisfaction, the kind that arises from mastery itself, rather than recognition. She had transformed a simple, inexpensive rifle into an instrument of extraordinary precision, and in doing so, had transcended the limits of expectation, ridicule, and doubt. With the final shots complete, Mara began to walk slowly toward the edge of the field, each step measured, carrying the quiet pride of accomplishment, while the crowd lingered, absorbing the magnitude of what they had witnessed. The field, now silent except for the gentle rustling of leaves in the evening breeze, bore witness to an extraordinary demonstration of skill, patience, and perseverance, the triumph of focus over skepticism, preparation over assumption, and mastery over the impossible. The evening air had grown cooler, carrying a subtle scent of earth and grass, and Mara stood at the edge of the field, surveying the expanse she had conquered with her skill. The golden light of the setting sun danced across the rifle in her hands, highlighting its worn but dependable frame, the very tool that had carried her through the impossible shots of the day. She felt a quiet pride, not in the awe of the onlookers, but in the culmination of years of solitary practice, meticulous attention, and unwavering dedication. The field, once filled with doubtful glances and whispered mockery, now hummed with a quiet reverence, an unspoken acknowledgement that Mara's abilities transcended the ordinary. She could feel the subtle shift in energy, the way people moved around her with a mixture of caution, respect, and curiosity. Each observer, whether seasoned hunter or casual bystander, seemed to carry a renewed understanding. Skill, patience, and focus were more powerful than any expensive equipment or flashy demonstration. Mara's mind drifted briefly to the early days of her training, when each missed shot and every moment of frustration had tested her resolve. She remembered the biting cold of winter mornings, the relentless sun of summer afternoons, and the countless hours spent alone, analyzing the minutest details of trajectory, wind, and balance. Every failure had been a lesson, every doubt a challenge, and every small success a step closer to mastery. Now, standing at the pinnacle of her personal achievement, she understood that the journey itself had shaped her more than the outcome ever could. The crowd began to disperse slowly, conversations buzzing softly, but Mara remained focused, preparing herself for one final sequence of shots she had envisioned before the day began. These were the targets she had deliberately left until last, positioned in the most challenging locations, partially obscured by natural obstacles and set at varying distances that tested every aspect of her skill. She moved with deliberate calm, aligning her body, adjusting her stance, and measuring each distance with practiced eyes. The first of this final series required an almost imperceptible compensation for wind, a subtle tilt of the rifle, and precise control of breath and pulse. Mara's movements were fluid, almost meditative, each action an extension of thought rather than conscious effort. When she released the first bullet, it flew with remarkable precision, striking the target exactly where intended. The impact was soft yet undeniable, drawing appreciative murmurs from those who remained nearby, their expressions a mix of awe and disbelief. Mara did not pause. The rhythm of her actions carried her seamlessly to the next target, a smaller object partially hidden behind the uneven terrain. Each shot demanded intense focus, calculation, and subtle adjustment, yet she executed them with unwavering composure. Her body moved in harmony with her mind, the rifle an extension of her intent, guiding projectiles with near-perfect accuracy. With every successive target, the difficulty increased. Some were partially obscured by shadows, others placed at extreme angles or distances, yet Mara navigated each challenge effortlessly. The observers who remained could only watch, their prior skepticism now completely replaced by recognition of her extraordinary skill. Mara's focus never wavered. She felt the familiar satisfaction that came not from external approval, but from the successful application of her years of dedication. When she reached the final target, a tiny marker perched precariously on a slope at the edge of the field, she paused briefly, assessing every variable. The wind had shifted slightly, the distance was deceptive, and the angle was challenging. Mara adjusted her stance subtly, calibrated her aim with meticulous care, and exhaled slowly, centering herself. With a deliberate squeeze of the trigger, the bullet soared across the field, navigating the subtle slope and variable conditions, and struck the tiny target dead center. The impact was precise, undeniable, and final. The remaining spectators could do nothing but gasp in admiration, some applauding softly, others staring in stunned silence, finally acknowledging the impossible had been achieved. Mara lowered her rifle slowly, a calm smile playing across her lips, her satisfaction profound yet quiet. She had demonstrated not just skill, but the power of preparation, focus, and unwavering determination. The field, bathed in the warm glow of the setting sun, seemed to embrace her achievement, the shadows long and serene, marking the end of a day filled with mastery and accomplishment. She walked slowly toward the edge of the field, each step deliberate, the weight of her rifle a comforting reminder of the journey she had undertaken. The air was filled with the subtle sounds of evening, leaves rustling gently, distant birds calling, and the faint murmur of departing voices still tinged with reverence. Mara understood that she had left a lasting impression, not merely through her shots, but through the embodiment of patience, discipline, and resilience. She had taken a humble rifle, underestimated by all, and transformed it into a tool of extraordinary precision, proving that true ability transcends material value and superficial judgment. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a golden glow across the field, Mara felt a serene sense of completion. The impossible had been made real, the ridicule replaced by admiration, and her journey validated in the most tangible way possible. In that quiet, golden moment, she understood fully that mastery was not about recognition or acclaim, but about the unwavering commitment to one's own potential, the dedication to craft, and the silent satisfaction of having achieved what others believed unattainable. Mara's day had ended, but the lessons, the discipline, and the fulfillment would endure far beyond the setting sun. The twilight settled over the field, turning the landscape into a palette of muted golds and deepening shadows, and Mara remained at the center, rifle in hand, reflecting on the day's achievements. The crowd had mostly dispersed, leaving behind only a few onlookers who lingered in quiet awe, hesitant to break the serene atmosphere that had enveloped the field. Mara's attention, however, was not on them. She had long understood that true mastery was internal, measured not by the reactions of others but by the precision, focus, and discipline one maintained in every action. Her mind drifted back to the countless hours of preparation that had brought her to this point, the early mornings, the late nights, the repetition of drills, the meticulous study of wind patterns, angles, and distances. Each misstep, each failure, each moment of doubt had been a necessary part of her journey, shaping her skill and tempering her resolve. Tonight, as the sun's final rays glimmered across the field, she felt a deep sense of accomplishment, a satisfaction that arose from within rather than from applause or recognition. The remaining targets she had set for herself were the most difficult yet, irregularly spaced, partially hidden, and positioned in challenging terrain that required not just precision but intuition, judgment, and confidence. Mara adjusted her stance, aligning her body with each subtle incline and angle, her breath steady, her hands firm yet relaxed. Each movement was deliberate, a seamless integration of thought, observation, and action. She selected her first target, a small object almost camouflaged by the shadows of nearby bushes, and focused her vision, calculating distance, wind direction, and angle with meticulous care. When she released the shot, the bullet flew with unwavering accuracy, striking precisely where intended, its trajectory a testament to years of focused training. Mara did not pause, her rhythm uninterrupted, flowing naturally into the next target, which required compensating for both elevation and a shifting breeze. She moved with quiet confidence, her body instinctively adjusting to maintain balance and stability, her mind entirely in sync with each action. The bullet reached its mark flawlessly, leaving no room for doubt, and the subtle sound of impact echoed softly across the evening field. Mara's sequence continued, each shot more challenging than the last, demanding absolute focus and a keen awareness of the complex variables at play. Some targets were partially obscured, others placed at extreme distances, yet she navigated each with calm precision, her movements deliberate, her concentration unwavering. The remaining spectators, a handful who had lingered out of sheer fascination, watched silently, their expressions a mixture of awe, disbelief, and newfound respect. They could see now what they had failed to grasp earlier. Mara's skill was not a product of luck or a fluke, but the culmination of disciplined practice, patience, and an extraordinary understanding of her craft. As she approached the final target, positioned at the edge of the field on uneven terrain and partially hidden by a slope, she allowed herself a moment of reflection. The bullet that would strike this target would not merely be a demonstration of technical skill. It would symbolize the totality of her journey, the mastery she had earned through years of dedication. She crouched, aligning her stance with precision, and took a deep, steadying breath. Her mind focused entirely on the interplay of distance, wind, elevation, and instinct, every variable carefully calculated and accounted for. Then, with deliberate control, she squeezed the trigger. The bullet soared across the field, navigating the complex conditions with uncanny accuracy, and struck the target dead center. The impact was subtle yet definitive, the culmination of every lesson learned, every hour spent refining her craft. The remaining spectators could do nothing but gape, their awe palpable in the quiet evening. Mara lowered her rifle slowly, a serene smile gracing her lips, fully aware of the profound impression she had left. The sun had set completely now, casting the field in shades of twilight, and yet the brilliance of her accomplishment seemed to linger in the air. She had turned ridicule into respect, skepticism into awe, and a simple, inexpensive rifle into an instrument capable of executing the impossible. Mara walked toward the edge of the field, each step deliberate and calm, feeling the familiar weight of her rifle and the satisfaction of mastery settle deep within her. She understood that the true measure of skill was not in public recognition, but in the quiet confidence that comes from knowing one has achieved what was once considered unattainable. As the shadows deepened and the first stars began to appear in the evening sky, Mara felt a profound sense of completion, a stillness that echoed the inner peace earned through dedication, focus, and perseverance. The day had been a testament not only to her extraordinary ability, but to the power of patience, discipline, and unwavering belief in one's potential. She knew that the lessons she had learned, the precision she had honed, and the calm determination she had demonstrated would endure far beyond this evening, shaping every challenge she faced in the future. And as she stood there, bathed in the soft glow of twilight, Mara understood something vital. Mastery is not measured by the price of equipment, by external validation, or by the doubts of others, but by the unwavering commitment to oneself, the relentless pursuit of excellence, and the courage to turn the impossible into reality. The night had fully descended, draping the field in deep indigo, punctuated only by the soft glimmer of stars and the pale light of the moon. Mara stood silently, rifle in hand, the weight of it familiar and comforting, a companion that had carried her through a day of remarkable achievements. The air was cool now, carrying the faint scent of grass and earth, and the quiet rustle of leaves seemed to echo the stillness that had settled within her. The few remaining onlookers lingered at a distance, speaking in hushed tones as if afraid to disturb the serene atmosphere that enveloped the field. Mara's mind was not on their astonishment, however. She was reflecting on the culmination of her journey, the countless hours of dedication, the persistence through frustration and doubt, and the mastery that had been forged through relentless focus. Every shot she had taken, from the first at sunrise to the final demonstration at twilight, had been the result of patient preparation and unwavering discipline. She understood now, more clearly than ever, that skill was not merely a product of talent or equipment, but of sustained effort, attention to detail, and a willingness to push beyond the limits that others imposed. Mara's thoughts wandered briefly to the ridicule she had faced early in the day, the laughter and dismissive comments that had once filled the air. In retrospect, those moments had been essential, a catalyst that pushed her to prove not to others, but to herself, that perceived limitations were no match for preparation and resolve. Each act of skepticism had been transformed into motivation, fueling the concentration and determination that had guided every precise movement of her hands and every calculated aim of her rifle. As she surveyed the field, now bathed in silver moonlight, Mara felt a profound sense of closure. The terrain, which had once seemed daunting with its uneven ground and hidden obstacles, now lay conquered under the precision of her skill. Each shot, each trajectory navigated flawlessly, was a testament to her patience, her observation, and her ability to integrate knowledge and instinct into a seamless display of mastery. Mara lowered her rifle briefly, allowing herself a moment to savor the quiet triumph, the inner satisfaction that arose from knowing she had accomplished what others had deemed impossible. She knew that the true reward was not applause, not recognition, but the fulfillment of potential, the tangible result of discipline meeting opportunity. Yet even in this quiet, she could